In March 1968, at an airstrip near Nui Dat in South Vietnam, an American Special Forces captain witnessed something he considered absurd. Inside a makeshift Australian armory, elite soldiers were deliberately damaging their own weapons. Precision rifles lay on wooden benches while men calmly cut their barrels shorter with hacksaws. Metal filings covered the floor. No urgency, no concern, no explanation offered. To American eyes, trained in doctrine built on range, accuracy and firepower, the scene bordered on incompetence. The captain laughed openly. He dismissed the Australians in front of his men and made a remark that would follow him for the rest of his career. "Look at those idiots. They won't last a week." 6 hours later, that same officer was trapped in dense jungle terrain, pinned down by a Viet Cong ambush, losing men by the minute, shouting into his radio for help. The only unit close enough to reach him was the same Australian patrol he had mocked earlier that day. What followed did not simply save American lives, it exposed a fundamental failure in US military doctrine and forced quiet changes that would take decades to acknowledge. The origins of that moment begin weeks earlier, with something most armies considered irrelevant. When an American intelligence officer arrived at the Australian base at Nui Dat, his first reaction was physical. He recoiled. The smell was overwhelming. Rot, stagnant water, decay, a biological density that clung to the air. The officer had spent over a year in Vietnam. He had visited hospitals, villages after bombardment, and mass casualty sites. None of those environments prepared him for what he encountered near the Australian patrol area. He assumed equipment failure or discipline collapse. He approached an Australian lieutenant to offer hygiene supplies. The response was immediate and sharp. The smell was intentional. Australian patrols eliminated all artificial scent weeks before entering the field. No soap, no deodorant, no toothpaste, no shaving cream, no insect repellent. No commercial cigarettes. They consumed local food, fermented fish sauce, indigenous ingredients, anything that altered body chemistry away from foreign markers. By insertion day, they smelled like jungle decomposition itself. Captured Viet Cong fighters later confirmed the reason. American patrols could be detected by scent from hundreds of meters away. The chemical profile of US hygiene products stood out instantly in humid jungle air. Deodorant left trails that lingered for hours. Insect repellent carried compounds unknown to the environment. American tobacco announced presence long before visual contact. Australian patrols left nothing. Viet Cong units regularly passed within arm's reach of concealed Australians without noticing them. One documented incident described an enemy fighter stepping directly on an Australian soldier's boot and continuing on without reaction. The soldier never moved. The smell doctrine disturbed American observers. The weapons disturbed them more. Australian SAS patrols modified standard L1A1 rifles by cutting the barrels significantly shorter. Flash suppressors were removed. Crude forward grips were added using scrap material. To American ordnance officers, the modifications were unacceptable. Ballistics were compromised, effective range was reduced, accuracy suffered. The Americans evaluated rifles based on engagement distances of hundreds of meters. The jungle did not operate at those distances. Visibility rarely exceeded 15 meters. Long barrels snagged on vines and bamboo. Every snag created sound. Every sound invited detection. Shortened rifles moved cleanly through vegetation. Range loss was irrelevant. The 7.62 round retained devastating stopping power at close distance, punching through bamboo cover and ending contact instantly. American M16 rifles fired lighter rounds designed for velocity and distance. In close jungle conditions, they frequently wounded rather than stopped. Australian doctrine focused on ending encounters immediately. American observers then noticed something else. Australian soldiers wore sandals, specifically sandals cut from automobile tires, identical to Viet Cong footwear. Tracking was a primary enemy skill. American boots left recognizable tread patterns. Viet Cong trackers could identify unit type, direction, speed, and numbers within minutes. Australian patrols erased that advantage. Their tracks blended with enemy movement. A Viet Cong scout following those prints assumed friendly forces. No alarm, no ambush preparation. Australians reinforced this deception through additional methods: movement through streams, stepping on roots and rocks, brushing out tracks at crossings. Enemy trackers lost the trail entirely. American forces used dismissive language for the Viet Cong. Slang, derogatory terms. The enemy was viewed as inferior. Australians referred to them formally. Enemy tactics were studied carefully. Enemy successes were analyzed, not dismissed. Capabilities were respected. This respect shaped behavior. American patrols advanced with confidence in technology. Australians advanced assuming danger at every step. The difference showed in casualty figures. In Phuoc Tuai province, Australian SAS patrols achieved casualty ratios approaching one friendly loss for every 500 enemy fighters eliminated. American units operating similar missions nearby averaged closer to 1 for 12. The disparity was not explainable by terrain or luck. It reflected doctrine. The most controversial difference was speed. American patrols moved kilometers per day. This was considered cautious. Australian patrols moved roughly 100 meters per hour. American officers initially assumed error. Demonstrations corrected that assumption. Australian patrols advanced one step, then froze completely. Minutes passed. No movement, no sound. The jungle normalized around them. After 30 minutes, 4 armed men had advanced 50 meters in complete silence. Detection probability dropped to near zero. Enemy patrols moving at standard speed became audible long before contact. Australians detected them first, chose engagement or avoidance, and controlled outcomes. The jungle did not register Australian presence. 6 days after the mockery at Nui Dat, an American airborne company entered enemy territory unaware of a reinforced Viet Cong battalion nearby. The enemy heard them coming. The ambush was prepared carefully. Automatic weapons and rockets struck simultaneously. Casualties mounted instantly. American doctrine responded exactly as trained: artillery, gunships, suppression. None of it disrupted prepared positions. By midday, the company was near collapse. The American commander requested Australian assistance. The Australian patrol moved at standard pace. The American officer protested. The Australians refused to accelerate. Faster movement would mean detection and useless reinforcement. Instead, 4 men infiltrated through the enemy rear, using battlefield noise as cover. They moved inside the perimeter without detection. From within the Viet Cong position, the Australians began transmitting artillery corrections. Not area fire, exact coordinates. Command positions were destroyed. Heavy weapons fell silent. Withdrawal routes were sealed. The battle reversed in minutes. American survivors extracted. Australian casualties, 0. Reports were classified. Captured enemy documents revealed Viet Cong doctrine had evolved. American units were engaged aggressively. Australian units were avoided. Enemy guidance explicitly warned against contact with Australian patrols. They were described as invisible. The term used translated loosely to jungle ghosts. Australian methods drew from indigenous tracking traditions refined over tens of thousands of years: absolute stillness, environmental integration, observation without disturbance. These were not abstract concepts. They were survival tools. American doctrine emphasized action. Australian doctrine emphasized patience. The jungle rewarded one and punished the other. Effectiveness carried consequences. Sustained hypervigilance altered behavior permanently. Some veterans struggled to reintegrate into civilian life. The skills that ensured survival did not switch off easily. The methods worked. The price was real. American Special Operations eventually adopted similar principles decades later: stealth over speed, adaptation over force, patience over presence. The lessons existed in 1968. They were ignored. The men who survived remembered why. One officer never forgot the radio call he made that day, nor the soldiers he once laughed at. The Pentagon dismissed them. The jungle feared them. The survivors owed them their lives. That is the legacy of the Australian patrols who were called idiots and proved everyone else wrong.